Hi everyone. You can hear me, I'm sure. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bill Mousoulis and I'm one of the team at Unknown Pleasures. Unknown Pleasures is a screening series that normally plays at the Thornbury Picture House once every month. We do programming of Australian independent film, especially underrepresented films or just really kind of alternative and unknown ones. But for today's event, obviously we needed a larger venue, and so thanks for coming. Thanks to ACMI for presenting this session along with Unknown Pleasures. Special thanks to Ella Cawthorne and Reese Goodwin as well. And I'd like to thank the traditional owners of this land as well, who somehow allow us to live, work and play here after 250 years of abuse against them. So my respects to the Wurundjeri elders and my love and solidarity with all Indigenous people, especially and through the world as well, especially the Palestinians who are suffering great tragedy at the moment. I won't say much about Nigel myself because we'll leave it for the panel discussion at the end. Suffice to say that he was very important for me as a filmmaker myself. He was, very supportive and almost like a mentor, and over the years became like a real kind of elder. And I, for one, love to respect my elders or our elders. For the panel, we've got some, really good people. We've got a couple of film critics, programmers, Adrian, Danks and Jake Wilson. We've got Nubar Ghazarian, who's a filmmaker artist, who actually was a student at Swinburne in the late 70s, mainly under Peter Tammer, I think, not so much under Nigel himself. But he then went on to work with Nigel on some of his films. We've also got Amanda Falvo, who's the daughter of Nigel. And we were meant to also have Jason Buesst, Nigel's son, but he prefers to just kind of let Amanda do the talking for the two of them, for that whole family side of things. First, before we get to the discussion, we've got a 73-minute compilation of excerpts from Nigel's films. So this has been put together by Peter Tammer, who's done an amazing job, going through all the films and scouring through like the excerpts that he wanted. He's done like high def upgrades of many of the films, and I guess that's all I can say that for the moment. You'll see what I mean. Nigel's film work was very varied, and I think this compilation captures that. So I guess that's about it for the moment, so enjoy. Thank you, Peter Tammer, for that lovely tribute to Nigel. I think what you've done there with the clips from his films is actually very similar to what he did for the Carlton filmmakers in his film Carlton and Goddard. So it's really important. I know you've done it just for this session today, but hopefully we can put that online and people can see it more. So I'll just introduce everyone from this end here. This is Nubar Ghazarian, who, as I mentioned before, worked with Nigel on a number of films as editor, and he was also a student of Tammer's and a little bit of Nigel's as well, or Nigel.
Yes.
Yeah. And then we've got Adrian Danks from film programmer with the Melbourne Cinematheque, and professor at RMIT and a film critic in general. And we've got Jake Wilson, who's a film critic for The Age and Sydney Morning Herald, and a programmer as well for the Bukalebek. Is that how you say their name?
I don't know. Belekebek is what I say.
Belekebek Brunswick Cinema, which is like a micro cinema, and which puts on really fantastic films, actually.
Screening tonight, I think. Jake, isn't it? Yep, screening tonight, yes. Far better because it's Bullfighter and the Lady, yes, in Brunswick.
And on the end, we've got Amanda Falvo, who's the daughter of Nigel. She'll actually kind of go through the non-film side of Nigel, and he had quite a few interests. And I'd just like to say also that we've got members of the Buesst family in the audience, and also Nigel's widow, Diane Rees. And I just wanted to do acknowledgements. I think also for the tribute that Peter put together, thanks to the family, Amanda and Jason, for hunting down a few of those films which we didn't have. And also Adrian Danks provided a couple of films for us. I might throw to Adrian first actually, and Adrian, if you can give maybe like an overview of Nigel's film cultural kind of work over the years, and maybe the kind of impact that had, I guess, especially on filmmakers.
Well, I think on film curators and other people as well, not just filmmakers. Sure, I can do that. I'll try to do that anyway.
Just for those who don't know.
Actually, before I do that though, I think I'd like to also thank you, Bill, for putting this together, because this is...
Thanks, Adrian.
These kinds of things can pass us by without them being marked adequately, and I think it's very... I think the kind of work that Nigel made and did, which is extraordinary, but it can easily get lost to history as well. So I think these kinds of events help keep it in the public consciousness. I mean, a question quickly for everyone in the audience: who'd seen many of those films before? A few, but most people haven't. Particularly younger people haven't seen the films; they haven't been available. And the compo must have been in terrible condition to not show some of it, Peter. It wouldn't have stopped Nigel though. He would have included it, I'm sure. He didn't really bother too much about copyright and things like that. But your question about his contribution to film and screen culture, I mean, I do have it. I didn't know Nigel that well. I had met him on a number of occasions over 30 odd years. I actually first met him at Croydon Film Society back in 1990 at a screening of Compo, one of the few screenings it probably had at the time in Melbourne. On a cold, wintry night in 1990 in Croydon, and there was Nigel as always. And I met him for the last time, actually only a month or so before he died, actually at his house, where I'd come to try to find a print of the film that had seemingly become lost. There's some archival materials in the archive, but there were no other copies around. A film called Hey L Baby. And Nigel thought he might have a print of it. It turns out he only had a DVD. And I found that out pretty quickly, and it was all a bit disappointing, and then it was wonderful to spend a whole afternoon, or at least a couple of hours with Nigel, talking about a whole range of things, including some of the software that you're using, Peter, he was talking to me about, and he's talking to me about Robert Whittaker and various other people. So quite a digressive thinker, but extraordinary in that regard. And I guess I bring up those two things because they indicate how everything with Nigel, for me anyway, seems very interconnected. So to talk about the films separately from film culture, to talk about the films and film culture separately to Nigel's other loves like jazz music, etc., which all filter through all of the films, seems almost impossible to actually do, in a kind of wonderful way. But nevertheless, yes, he did. You can mark off significant contributions to screen culture in Melbourne, and I think he's a legendary figure, a key figure in that culture of the last 60 years. Whether that's being involved with making films in the 1960s, and I don't mean just the films he directed, but the films that he enabled, and he was absolutely an enabler, enabling other people to make films, lending them equipment, coming in and just shooting, on the spur of the moment, helping you make something or record something. You've had that experience, Bill.
Oh yes, he helped me a number of times.
Yeah. I mean, a good example of that is the screening we held last year at the Cinematheque. At the very end of the year is it's the 40th anniversary of the Cinematheque and the 75th anniversary of the Melbourne University Film Society, which of course Nigel had an involvement with or was part of in the early 1960s. And we screened a film called Nothing Like Experience, in which Nigel appears. So it was possibly the last time I think he appeared on screen before his death. Also, he shot some of the footage for the film, but the only credit he had on the film was for hairstyles, which seemed quite fanciful from what I could say. Not was a film that ever needed a hairstyling, but supposedly Nigel was involved with that.
It was probably a little in joke.
I think it was very much a little in joke. So he's a very important figure in terms of the building of that kind of poor Melbourne cinema and that carbon-centred cinema of the 1960s. Which kind of blurred between filmmaking and film culture. So he's really key figure within that, without ever quite belonging to a particular group. And from what I know of Nigel, that would seem quite an accurate description in some ways. That he was a fellow traveller, but not necessarily belonged to a group like that. So he was always there to help.
Yeah, I think he had this kind of overarching overview of everything in a way, and he obviously chose to spend quite a bit of his time, maybe it was fortuitous, teaching film students at Swinburne, and that lasted about 13.
Yeah, I was going to get onto that next,
yeah.
And obviously that was the next key stage of Nigel's while he was still making those really important films like Come Out Fighting and Bonjour Baldwin, and was part of the film co-ops as well, because Come Out Fighting was an important film for the film co-ops and was shown quite widely there. We did a retrospective a few years ago, and that was one of the films that was chosen to be part of that particular program. I think rightly so as well. But I think, and many of the people who came through Swinburne from 1970 to 1984, which I think were the years that he was actually there, talk about his extraordinary generosity, and that's obviously a term that I see being used all the time about Nigel. And I always found him a very generous person as well. Even if we couldn't find the film we were looking for, we did find it in the end, by the way. The first place I looked for it, looked again and found it 9 months later, as these things happen, right? But throughout that period, he really was there to help filmmakers, listen to them, lend them equipment, give them advice, while he was making his own films, while he was assessing, a little bit of assessing I think he did for the Australian Film Commission as well. So that was a really rich period, maybe not such a rich period in terms of his own filmmaking once it got past the early 1970s for a period of time, and it seemed like he returned to that when he left Swinburne. But this is a common story I think Nigel would probably also tell, that it's very hard to make films when you're teaching them. Though I can't imagine what Nigel would have made at Contemporary University, frankly.
We won't go there.
And then, of course, he had a very successful period as the director of the St Kilda Film Festival in its early stages. So he wasn't for the first couple of years, but between 1986 and 1990, and he was involved in the instigation of that as well. And again, for Nigel's obviously Melbourne is a central element of Nigel's being, but also almost everything he did and made, for better and worse for Nigel, because I think, elsewhere in Australia or even, people probably were, who is this Nigel Buesst, right? But we don't think that in Melbourne, right? Because he's so connected to Melbourne and Melbourne culture, even though he obviously is someone who travelled around the world and, wasn't someone who was just centred in Melbourne. So he had a successful period being the director of the St Kilda Film Festival. And then after that, there was a whole series of other contributions that he made. I think his key contributions often were things that will never be documented. Okay, they were the advice he gave to people, the help he gave them on the spur of the moment. And film culture like that, and film collaboration like that is often not documented. Having said that, most of the films that get made in Melbourne also, largely are not seen or rarely seen too. Nigel's films are partly part of that. But you know this with your own films, Bill, as well. You've been great in curating your own work.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder if that kind of film cultural activity shadows or overshadows the film work.
Yeah, and I think that doesn't quite do that with Nigel though, okay? Because obviously all of that was so directly related to the other work that he was actually doing. So, and look, from my experience of seeing Nigel in that, a month before he died, he was still doing the same things. He still had the hundreds of CDs of music that he was pointing me towards, and do you want to listen to that, or you should watch this, and so even though he was having trouble getting around, and it was a bit rambling. Okay, that's nothing unusual, I don't think either. I think he always had that generosity.
Yeah, absolutely. I might cut to Jake now to actually maybe talk about the film. We will have questions from the audience, but just not yet. So Jake, in terms of Nigel's actual films, I'm not sure how many of them you would have seen, but what strikes you about them, like in an overall sense, and are there particular ones you think actually are worthy of being included in a conversation of landmark films in Australia?
Yeah, I mean, first, yes. And if I can sort of start by talking about where I came in. The first time I met Nigel, who I also didn't know well, but I did meet him on various occasions over the years. The first time I met him was because of Carlton plus Goddard equals cinema, and that was, I think, 2003.
Yep.
And it is both a film of his and also a work of curation. He's assembled really substantial portions of all these films by him and by other people, and put them together into what is both an anthology and an essay film. So none of these films, first, I had ever seen before. I don't think I'd seen a single one of them. They were films that were not very accessible to me at that time in my early 20s. So then I decided to interview him for Senses of Cinema, which I was involved in, and that was, I hadn't done a lot of interviews either, and I went to meet him in Carlton, and he spent, again, I think the whole afternoon talking to me, and I did certainly get an idea of him being, as you said, Adrian, a non-linear thinker. And I learned a lot about a variety of things, but I do remember going away and I transcribed it, and I looked at the transcript and I thought, this is very all over the place. A lot of the things that he says are not really directly answers to my questions, or they get to the answer eventually, but there's a lot of stuff first. So I kind of cut it back and cleaned it up, and then I sent it to Nigel to see what he thought. And he rewrote it substantially, both his answers and my questions, and that's what wound up in Senses. But I think it is as it wound up finally, which has actually rather little to do with me. I think it is when I went back to it for the purpose of this of today. I thought it actually is quite a good expression of not only what he had to say about Colin plus Goddard equals cinema, but some of his preoccupations that I think you can actually see running through quite a number of his films. And really, I think there were three things that as you saw with that compilation, which Peter Tammer did, he did a very wide range of things. So it is actually quite hard to sum up and say this is what his films were about. I think the things that jump out to me are first the humour and the sardonic kind of point of view, the slightly deflating, sceptical point of view that is brought to bear on whatever subject he's dealing with. Second, as you said, Adrian, the interest in local history, especially the interest in Melbourne. You see a lot of his films are close in, they're low budget. You see a lot of interior scenes, things where you're just looking at a few people. But something that I noticed looking at his films before today, and then also watching the compilation, is how often he goes back to the Melbourne skyline and how you see the skyline shift over the years in the different films that he made, and how always there is a sense of whatever he's shooting existing in that context of a city. And then the thing that he really talked about quite a lot to me that day in Carlton when I interviewed him was to do with questions which are both very practical and down to earth, and then also quite deep, which has to do with things like status and how you make a career and what it is to be a success or a failure. And I think these do actually keep coming up in different contexts in quite a number of his films. I think you even sort of get something of it in those clips from the documentaries about musicians that we watched. Like, are these people successful? What would that mean to be a success? What would it mean to be a success? Like, does it mean you have to be successful in a larger context, in say an international context? Does it mean you have to make a lot of money or be famous and so on? And from his films, and also from the little I knew him, I do get the impression these were questions that he asked himself quite a bit. And they are there really from early on. They're there in Bonjour Bourbon, they're there in Come Out Fighting, and then they're very much also there in Compo, which is a film you can watch on YouTube. Actually quite a good copy on YouTube, which is worth seeking out. And it's a very interesting film that ties in very much with the films he was making in the 60s and 70s. I think, Bonjour Bourbon and Come Out Fighting and Compo are all, very interesting films. I think maybe overall I might point to Come Out Fighting especially, but I think Bonjour Bourbon has great sequences in it, and the clips that we saw are kind of wonderful. He talked a lot about Godard, like in that interview I did with him. Godard was obviously important to him. The French New Wave was important to him, but to me all that stuff about repossessing televisions and the sort of variations on the theme, it didn't make me think of Godard, but it did make me think of Truffaut. The sorts of little episodes that you get in Truffaut films where it's sort of really something where it might almost be getting on the spot, improvising a gag around a location and coming up with different ideas about the same basic premise and so on, and finding ways to make it entertaining. And I think, there's a lot of that side in the French New Wave, in that film, perhaps less so in something like Come Out Fighting. But anyway, so those are a few of the things which maybe tie parts of the career together.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. And we all wish that Nigel's work can be seen more. And I think there are plans from the family to put a lot of them online. So, Nubar, firstly, thanks for coming here, because Nubar's come from King Island. And okay, it's not overseas or anything. So it is. Yeah.
Is that working?
But it is working, I think. Can you, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about when you were a student, or a bit later when you were mainly, I think you were editor on a number of Nigel's films.
Yeah. Well, basically I'd like to start with me being a student, because I came into film late and I sort of started shooting stuff on Super 8 and making diary films and stuff like that, and eventually went to State College of Teaching College, and that's where I met Peter. He was teaching there, and a number of others. The Cantrells were doing their stuff. And then when I did a bit of teaching secondary, and then I decided to do the postgrad course, and ended up going to Swinney, and Peter was my teacher for that year, and it was a fantastic year, and it was the first time that I really had an opportunity to really work on something, on a project, on a high level. Actually, it was quite amazing because Peter actually shot the film. We all, all the students worked for each other's films.
Can I correct you for 1 minute? Nigel started teaching you that year, and I filled in for the second half of the year.
That's right.
And then you were making your film, and I shot it for you.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So I had a taste of Nigel's absolutely perspective and everything else. And one of the things about Nigel, he's quietly engages you, and he does it in that sort of laconic, very Australian way, and it's a beautiful experience, and it's, that he is tuning in on you, tuning in on the way you think as a student of film, and you know whatever he says, you're going to weigh it up, you're going to think about it. And that, I had a lot of respect for Nigel and for Peter, because they led as teachers by example. So they were making films and teaching. And that's my core as a teacher when I became a teacher, is that I felt that that's an important thing to do, because then your students understand where you're coming from. They respect you and you respect them. And the Melbourne experience both of you talked about, it's very much a Melbourne experience. It's not about, oh, I'm going to be famous. It's about an understanding, a collaboration, the ability and the willingness to collaborate. And in collaborating, you learn so much. You learn a huge amount about yourself and about the people around you and how they contribute to your filmmaking. And I've had a long collaboration with Nigel, who's here, Nigel Deans. Over the years, we've made a couple of films together. One very big film that went for 20 years before it was finished. And it's about jazz. I'm very interested in jazz because I think our way, or my way at least, of making films is jazz oriented. It's very jazzy. The script is jazzy. It can be moved, it can change, but there's a very strong element of jazz in it. Even when I think of what looks like a straight documentary, like, let's say, the one about the Armenian theatre group that went on SBS, Tadron. I didn't have a script for that. It was just me there and finding out about the people and the way they were with each other and bringing that out, you know, just with a camera. That's it. That's all you need. And then later on you reflect on it. The editing is so important, isn't it? It's crucial. You know, that stint of 5 years that I was working at the ABC, heaven forbid anybody doing that, but it's, you know, it's important because you're finding out from others, like the cinematographers, the sound recorders, the producer, everybody comes to the editor. And so you get a sense of how that film is structured and how it's going to progress and everything else. With Compo, it was my first stint of a big film, a feature film, and it was shot on Super 16. So the gate of the Super 16 is the same ratio as 35. So when you do a final print of the film, you can go to 35. It blows up the image, so you've got to have a very good cinematographer. And there was Vladimir Osharov. What a fantastic cinematographer. So hardly any quality lost in the blow up, you know. I edited the film on 16mm Steenbeck, but then it was printed up to 35. And that was a great experience. Nigel had sunrise pictures, sorry, just in Fitzroy, and I virtually lived there because I'd go there after teaching at Swinney. I'd go there, I'd start editing the film, and then I'd sleep, you know, because I'd work right through the night, and then I'd sleep there, get up in the morning, go to college to teach, come back. Anne didn't see much of me for a long time. And but that was really good, living with the film. You know, when you've got those, I don't know, but we're now all digital and everything else, but there's something about a trim bin with loads of bits of film on it, and you're sort of looking at it and you're going, I think that little bit, you know. You've got to be reasonably organised, but still there's something very tactile about it. There's a tactile nature of film, and that's probably why now I'm more going into my art and sketching and painting and all that, because I find the tactile part of it so important. I enjoy collaboration, but it's really good to be totally independent. Totally. As an artist, there it is, your canvas, your frame, whatever it is, and no worries about going cap in hand to organisations to try to get money or whatever. You can do it all yourself and not worry about all those things. And the art form is pure, and you know, while with film there's so much compromise, so many things that can go wrong, and it's how many, you know, Bill, how many films would you have thought of, even worked on in terms of scripts or whatever, and then it never comes to fruition?
Absolutely.
Yes.
And sorry to cut you short, Nubar. We have got a limited amount of time, and I just want to cut to Amanda now, who can say mainly some non-film activity that Nigel was engaged in.
Yeah, sure. Well, as a family man, he was completely consistent to everything everyone has said, being very generous with his time. He was also very accessible as a parent, and he exposed us to a lot of really interesting things that he was interested in. So experimental animations from the 70s, really cool music that he picked up from London during the 1970s, that things like David Bowie, Jean-Michel Jarre. He had a really broad and eclectic taste in music, not just jazz, but if you went through his record collection, there were just so many different titles in there, so many different influences, a lot of minimalist experimental music in the 60s. And I think a lot of that seeped into his film as well and had very sort of filmic qualities to it. But we were always, he didn't sort of separate his work and his home life. So, you know, we were always dragged in as kids or later on in life, all throughout life, to help out with the project. So, you know, Diane would be working on production, you know, Jason would pitch in doing something, I'd do some graphics or some animation. Rupert Tristan probably did a few bits and pieces, that's his grandsons. Did a few, probably got involved in helping him out technically and with music and stuff like that. But the house was always filled with all the equipment at Rathdown Street, because he had built the place like a home office. So he had all the steam decks were there. He actually built a home cinema with the 16mm projector stationed up in the kitchen, and then he knocked through a window so that it would go down to the split level in the Victorian house, and he had a huge screen set up. And I think Jason and I, we often had our friends over for full screenings with the excellent quality sound that Dad had hooked up, and he was very interested in that, you know, making sure that it was a great screening place and or home cinema. And I think we got a lot of kudos as kids, you know, from our friends, thinking, you know, wow, your dad's cool, you know, that sort of thing. So, but you know, he did DIY a lot of stuff, and he didn't get paid for a lot of stuff as well. So he offered his advice to was it Ross Campbell, who built, you know, the Irwin Rado Theatrette, and obviously I don't think he got paid, if at all, for his years at St Kilda Film Festival, I'm not sure. And then he also had, Jason and I were talking about this the other day, he had a handbook, filmmaker's handbook, which was literally just like hundreds of contacts within the film industry, And he wanted to make sure that everybody, or anybody who wanted to make a film in Melbourne, Victoria, or even Australia, would have all the contacts, know exactly how to go about resourcing those bits and pieces, where to apply for funding, and there wasn't really anything like that around at the time. And I remember he would photocopy it just on his photocopier at home and staple it up and, you know, do the cover and everything. And then I think he sold it at readings for like $2, and which was pretty much giving it away. You know, students would often rock up at the house and ask to borrow equipment, which he freely would just, you know, push out the door. You can, yep, take it, go make your film. I mean, and yeah, so, and he was very generous with us as kids, just with his time, and we'd always turn up at every single event with a camera in hand, and we always felt that our opinions mattered. He was always, you know, you were saying before how he always wanted to know your opinion, and then he would offer his sort of either sage advice or his opinion back, and that was the same with us as children. He always wanted to know, you know, what you're up to, particularly what creative projects you were working on, but then he would often keep you on your toes with sort of a little bit of advice back, which would sort of, you know, like I'm a graphic designer, and I don't think he liked my colour compositions much. And, you know, red and green should not be seen without a colour in between, you know. And it kind of keeps you on your toes, really, you know. And I think that's true of pretty much everyone he met. He just felt like he was pushing you just a bit further, inspiring, pushing, and yeah, so to us he was a legend as well, and always will be.
That's it, life and cinema combined. We'll open it up to the audience. Have we got another mic?
We don't, can I grab one?
Oh, okay. Can you take mine?
Oh, you've got one? Oh, great, cool.
Okay, so we haven't got too much time, so maybe if you've got like comments or reminiscences, maybe keep them short, and otherwise, you know, ask a question. So up here, yeah.
Hello, Adrian. I was a student of Nigel's from 1976 to 78. I think one of the things that I know one of the things that sticks with me was he would say, "If in doubt, cut it out," and would force us to do those things. But I also remember seeing the opening of Squizzy. I don't know if it was the opening of Squizzy, but I remember seeing Squizzy and the guys coming onto the tram with their masks, covering their faces, scarves, and thinking, how can they get away with this? How can they get away with this? And then we would pull away to see that everybody else on the tram, because of the flu epidemic, was wearing scarves. And during COVID, that sort of struck back again how strong it was. So hi Nubar, nice to see you too. So no questions, just lovely fond memories.
Okay, Fred.
Fred, I'm a little worried about Peter Tammer's restoration work, because I know how hard he works on it and how we're still learning an awful lot about that. But I just think we have to raise a question mark about looking at some of the restored material and go, yes, that's because Topaz has grabbed that edge and made that lady's face. Can you see that as twice? You know, it's sort of like the whole process of enhancement has changed the source material.
Oh, look, that's a complex kind of area, and I'm sure Peter would be the first person to say that he's improving the films, the quality of the films as we have them at this moment. Like, to go back to the original neg of a lot of films, it would be the most ideal situation and create brand new restorations, but it costs a lot of money, and sometimes the negs are lost. And I think basically, you know, with Peter's work, we just get them up to some kind of level that they can be presented. Let's have another
I'd
question.
prefer to see them like we've got them now.
Can I?
Enhancement. But when you look at a row of people and you go, I don't recognise those faces anymore, I feel that we have to we probably need a rider on the bottom saying, some of this stuff isn't real anymore.
Is this off the subject?
Yeah, just Adrian.
It probably is a bit off the subject, but I think that one of the things we do really need is like full, Peter would agree with this, full restoration of a lot of Nigel's work. And that's not the job of Peter to do that. That's the job of if we had the National Film Archive, or, there are
Funding.
independent filmmakers who are getting this done through someone like Ray Argle, but it costs a lot of money to get it done. And it looks amazing, like when it's done properly, you wouldn't have those questions or concerns. But having screened quite a bit of this material on film, etc., it has deteriorated significantly even in that form too. So, although that's probably still preferable in many cases, but also quite a bit of this footage we're seeing is of films that have hardly been seen anywhere, or material that's hardly been seen anywhere.
And they're rare to, find. And
Yes.
a question here. Yep.
Hi, I'm Peter Dodds, and I was with Swinburne. I was at Swinburne I started in '68 and I finished in '70, and so Nigel was there in my last year. I thought he was there actually a little earlier than that. I could be wrong. But at that time, it was, the blind leading the incredibly myopic when it came to practitioners in film being able to teach. And the quality that Nigel brought in that last year that I was there was the ability of listening. His listening skills were extraordinary. In a time now when we are so time poor at actually listening, whether you're a director or editor, production designer, the ability to listen and engage with the creative baton that's passed from the inception of the project right through that process was something that Nigel was so good at listening to what you were saying. And for such a young student, to give you that time, I remember him very fondly.
Someone who really cared, absolutely. Another question or comment?
Yeah.
Down
I think
here,
the mic's just coming.
second row. No.
You can probably just, we don't need it. You want me to have my hand?
I knew Nigel from the early 1970s, and I'm also a historian. So what I wanted to raise was the Melbourne Filmmakers Cooperative, which he established he was just back from London, and he made that film with Jason getting into the house and what have you. The Melbourne Filmmakers Co-op started in a tiny little cafe, second floor, across from Parliament House on Spring Street. And it ran there for quite a while. And then we got the Lygon Street, where the Pram Factory now is. Not the Pram Factory, the shopping centre now is, and the Pram Factory was behind. We had frontage there right onto the street. And the films that were shown were experimental, and they weren't being seen anywhere else. And also something I found very interesting was the ones that came in from the States that had been made by computers, which were absolutely fascinating. Now, he probably brought his experience from London back here, and this was the starting point of his starting to introduce contemporary filmmaking to Australia. I might be biased.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, maybe Peter Tama or Adrian or anyone. Was Nigel one of the main instigators in 1970 even, I think it was?
Nigel wasn't keen on the co-ops.
No?
He was always more individual than... When he ran his screening of Squizzy and other films, I remember he did a double header of Squizzy and the film about Richard Milhouse Nixon, and that was shown at the Pram Factory. He ran a program at the Pram Factory for 4 or 5 weeks.
Yeah.
Maybe it was Dead Easy with that. I can't
Yeah,
remember
I can't
which one.
remember.
But anyhow, he wasn't keen on the co-ops.
Oh,
But he
was. He was
contributed to
very caught up
the
with it for a
Melbourne.
while.
Yeah,
to Melbourne.
But he always used to say we weren't going to get very far with it because no one's going to really do the work.
Well, he might have thought that, but we did the work. Yes, and a lot of the actors I recognised in the earlier films were Pram Factory people,
Absolutely. Yeah.
which is a wonderful connection, I think.
We've got a question down the front.
Just Ivan. It's coming behind you.
The mic's coming
You can have two of them if you want.
Stereo.
Ivan Gall.
This is for Jack. When you touched on it, I was wondering as I was watching the film Nigel all together as one lot, and overall I got this feeling that Nigel is searching. He's always searching for something, and not like most filmmakers, he doesn't give us any answers. He leaves the picture there and makes us decide what he wants to say. And so very open-ended, and I think it's a feeling I got that we have to appreciate Nigel, that he could and do and would communicate to us in such a very way. Anyway, do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with that. When he makes, films in the earlier films, when he's dealing with, let's say, what they used to call the generation gap, or people who are, living in different ways and different worlds, it seems to me he's not playing favourites. He's a little bit, as I said, sardonic. He's a little bit mocking of everybody, but on the other hand, he's not dismissive. Something I should have said about when I was talking before, and I want to say it now about Come Out Fighting, is that there were not a lot of Australian films with Indigenous protagonists in the early 70s, and I don't think there had been a film anything very much like that about an Indigenous character before that. And I think when you watch it, I think it says something about his character that he was able to make that film in 1973.
We haven't got too much time. Yeah, Lisa French. Yeah. Oh, you want to grab this?
Question for Amanda. I heard at the St Kilda Film Festival opening night that Nigel had left a bequest. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yes, he left $5,000 bequest to the St Kilda Film Festival because obviously he really felt quite passionate about making available some form of funding for the emerging new filmmakers, more experimental film, documentary and so on. I have to speak with Richard again about the details, but my understanding is that it'll be topped up every year and it'll be a prize specifically for young filmmakers who are going to make entrance into things like multimedia, games, animation, sort of experimental films. So we're not quite sure about the content of the category, but yeah, it'll be a terrific prize each year for City of Port Phillip entrance.
Fantastic. Another question? No? Oh yeah, we're finishing up pretty soon. Yeah.
Can I just add one thing? Oh, what we really need someone to make an essay documentary about Nigel. It would be a perfect subject in kind of the form of film that he kind of makes, to make a film about.
I think so. I mean, I think about that too, about certain kind of figures in the Melbourne kind of film scene, and I mean, we've actually got like Anna Canava's, mother and brother here today, and and Anna's life was quite extraordinary, and she hasn't got quite the high profile of people like John Klaus or Peter Tamo or Nigel in terms of teaching and directorship of festivals and all this kind of thing. But it would be fantastic, and I don't know. I mean, a lot of it is time, money, all those kind of things.
Of course it is, Bill. I mean, Nigel had obviously a philosophy of just because he was able to in some ways, but to just make the work. I mean, the carbon plus God equals cinema. There are many reasons it hasn't been screened that widely, but one of them is just not clearing the copyright on anything for the film.
He has got art films, yeah.
Well, he's got art films, but even the materials he's used for the material for the Melbourne, the Colin films, I mean, he's just used the sources that are available to him. I'm not saying that's a solution, it's not, in terms of getting, because the problem with that, of course, then the film doesn't achieve part of its goal, which is to get those films known to a wider audience. And I mean, part of the reason there's such long excerpts from the film is because it's a little bit like Peter's film here, which I think is a beautiful symmetry with it, is because this is the only way you get to see these films. As Jake was saying, he hadn't seen them before he saw the film, and these are all important films made in Melbourne in a period where very few films are being made.
Well, in a way, you know, you've got the whole atmosphere has changed because you've got digital technology, you've got social media, you've got, you know, plenty of platforms that you can show your film in. And so the whole idea that the generation that Nigel was in, you had to really struggle to just get film and process it and print it and get it. You know, it was a real process, you know. But now it's much more open. And so it's a different kind of world we're in in terms of what you're showing. There's probably a lot of quite interesting films on YouTube that nobody's seen. But you know what I mean? Like, it's just one of those things.
That's equally the problem that, you know, okay, someone could make a great documentary about one of these Melbourne filmmakers, legends, but you could put it online and no one will see it. You know, MIF won't program it, all these kind of things. So I think we'll have to wrap it up. So thanks everyone for coming, and thank you to the panelists.
And thanks Peter for bringing that together.